Markets in Kenya began on a positive trend on Monday. Both the Nairobi Securities Exchange All-Share Index and NSE 20 went up 0.34 and 1.38 points respectively. Safaricom was the most actively traded stock. For more, here's a conversation we had with Eric Mokaya, founder of Mwango Capital.
I think the market is it's settling down, especially after the election period. So I think the market participants are mostly watching what will happen at the Supreme Court. So I think the market is it's a bit here and there. You can't tell really where it's going. So I think last week the all-share index was down around 3%. And if you say it was slightly up yesterday, then that means that it's just a market trying to find its bearing, so to speak. So I think investors are watching very carefully what's happening in the Supreme Court. So I hope whoever loses there will accept the ruling. And I think if that happens, then the market will be a bit more relaxed going into the second half of the year. So I think a bit of good news this morning. I think the Bloomberg was reporting that the NSE is supposed to get a new listing, which is checking out by the end of this year. They should have a new listing at the NSE. It's been a while. It's been, I think, 3 years since a company listed. I think it's been 7 years now. So I think this will be good news for the markets generally. So my current leader situation is that I think it's a market that's trying to find its bearing as it waits the news of the Supreme Court and what happens there politically, I would say.
Safaricom is bouncing back. We saw yesterday its stock was the most traded stock on the NSE. After spending almost a week in red, could this be driven by the corporate news that tomorrow, August 31st, the company will be paying dividends, or there's more to that?
I think there was some good news. I think yesterday also about Ethiopia. So I think the company is getting started. I think I saw a couple of pictures showing the SIM cards of Safaricom Ethiopia. So I think that should have been the major driver yesterday. But of course, the fact that they're paying out dividends also next week, this week, that would also be good news to investors who are looking for cash to buy maybe other stocks. I think so from the statistics I saw yesterday, it was trading. It was the day's biggest mover, which is not a surprise. It was some 50 million shares were trading hands between around 28 and 29, which is above where it was trading, I think, in May, June, when it hit a low of around 23 Kenya shillings. So I think at the end of the day, then Safaricom is a big mover. So once it moves, then the rest of the market will follow along with it. So there wasn't such much movement in terms of price, even though there was much movement in terms of the number of shares that are traded generally. So Safaricom is good when it's performing well, then as it's performing well, knowing that it's around 70% of the market at the end of the day.
I mean, when you look at the NSE 25 index, which most investors track, it was down yesterday. What does that say about the performance of the blue chip companies trading at the Nairobi Securities Exchange at the moment?
So I think a single day movement is really hard to read because mostly that's driven, as I said, by Safaricom and how it moves. But then I think if you stretch out a bit and maybe look at maybe the last week or so, you can see the generally the NSE all-share index was the NSE 25 was down around 2.4%. So it's not that big of a movement currently, I would say. So I think, as I said earlier on, I would reiterate and say like it's mostly the market trying to find a bearing, especially given the political situation in Kenya currently. Nothing much can be said about most of the stocks. So I think maybe perhaps I can reiterate and say maybe the biggest movers last week were companies like Olympia, BOC, and NCBA, BK Group. So I think out of those four, I would say I would take out NCBA as one key company, that bank that was reporting earnings last week that paid a dividend. So it's one of the two that paid a dividend. The other one is it's ABSA, so NCBA. So it could be investors appreciating the fact that they're getting a little bit of dividend at the end of the day. So I think perhaps maybe something the listeners or the viewers would love to know is about bank earnings, which a couple of banks have reported. I think most of the big banks have already reported earnings for the first half of the year. So mostly what you see is they're performing well in terms of profits. Some like KCB are increasing the number of non-performing loans. So that's a bit of a worry to the market. And others and others like Bamburi reported earnings, which was a significant decline outside the big banks, Bamboo is one that reported earnings, and it was quite a terrible first half of the year. So I think the market is trying to digest some of this information from the various companies. And definitely we're looking forward to seeing the earnings of BK Group coming up this coming week also. So generally it's been an August to mostly digest earnings from banks, and most banks are doing well. Hopefully that continues and reflects in the share prices of some of these top banks and top companies that have reported so far.